This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good morning, Rabbi Sai. Bruchim Abam to the colleague of the Perka. This morning we're going to talk about names. The Gemara tells us in Masechta Brachos, the Gemara darshans many names. The Gemara talks about the name Rus. And the Gemara on Zayinim and Beis Masechta Brachos says the following: Minalan Deshma Garim. How do I know that a name has an influence on a person? What's the source of that? How do I know a person's name has an influence on them? Why should a name have any influence whatsoever on a person? It's, everyone has free choice. That is one of the fundamental principles of Judaism, that everybody has the ability to choose right or wrong. And yet the Gemara says a name has an effect on a person's character, on a person's behavior. Says the Gemara, the source is Amar Rabbi Elazar, the Amar Kra, Lechu Chazu Mifalois Hashem. It's a pasuk in Tehillim. Go out and see the actions of God, Asher Sam Shamois Ba'aretz, that He has created devastation in the world. Says the Gemara, Al Tikri Shamois Ela Shemois. Don't read it devastation, but rather read it names. So the Marsha says, what do you mean don't read it? It says Shamois, it doesn't say Shemois. It says God wrought, brings devastation to the world. What does it mean? Al Tikri Shamois, says the Marsha. We cannot attribute devastation to God, right? Nothing bad emanates from God. So how could the pasuk say Asher Sam Shamois Ba'aretz? It's not a mifal Hashem. How could it say L'chu Chazu Mifalois Hashem? A mifal of Hashem is not devastation. Devastation
is good.
No, a devastation is when God withdraws. That's not Hashem's act. That's Hashem's Sheva Al Tasa. It's his absence from that place. So therefore, the Gemara feels the correct way to read this pasuk is Asher Sam Shemois Ba'aretz, which means that everything that happens in this world happens because of the name of the person who is doing it. In other words, if you want to trace everything that happened in this world back to the original source is the name. Wow, that's a big chiddush that the Gemara is saying, right? L'chu chazu mifalois Hashem. Look how God acts. How does He act? Al tikri shamois ela shemois. Now, there's a very well-known idea, but probably most people are not familiar with what the source of it is. And that is, when a parent gives a name, there's a concept that the Rebbeinu Shalom gives a certain siyata d'shmaya to the parent to give a correct name, to give the proper name. Where's that from? It's not in Shas, it's not in Shulchan Aruch. It's from the Shalis Teshuvas Torah Lishma. Who wrote Shalis Teshuvas Torah Lishma? The Ben Ish Chai. Ben Ish Chai says that because of this Gemara that we see that everything Hashem performs in this world is through the person's name. So when a parent is giving a name to a child, at that moment God is very instrumental in helping the parent select a name. Okay.
Where would you bring this from? Hashem told Adam to give names to all the animals?
There Hashem didn't tell Adam to give names. Adam gave names.
But Hashem asked him, said, what's my name? Hashem said...
Yeah, well, the Medrash says that the animals passed before Adam, and Adam gave the name, and then the Rebbeinu Shalom said, what's my right? We see a name is a very important thing. It defines the character of that, right? It touches up the essence of that item. But the Gemara is saying that everything that happens in this world comes about through names.
Maybe not Shemot of the persons, but Shemot HaKodesh.
Okay. Possibly that may be a deeper meaning, but that Gemara is going on after explaining many, many names. Rus and this name and that name.
Is running the whole world by Shemot HaKodesh.
Okay, perhaps. The simple meaning of the Gemara, the way we're understanding it, is that it's through the Shemos HaAdam. In any event, the Gemara says, because of this, it's very important not to give the name of a Rasha, right? If somebody had an Elta Zeda, who, for whatever reason, his name was Beryl Hitler. So don't name your kid Chas v'Shalom Hitler, because v'shem Rishonim Yirkav. The Gemara says in Masechta Yuma, Daf Lamed Ches, Ala Rishonim Ne'amar Zecher Tzadik Levracha. About the early great ones, it says the memory of a tzaddik is a blessing. V'al ben Kamtzar v'Chaveir, and about these Rishon, ben Kamtzar and his friends, Ne'amar v'shem Rishonim Yirkav. The names of the Rishon will rat. My v'shem Rishonim Yirkav. What does it mean the names of the wicked will rat? Amar Rabbi Elazar, Rak Vivos, Tala, B'Shmaisam. Rust should go up on their names. Zolai Maskinon B'Shmaya, we don't use their names, right? You take the name, you put it on a high shelf, You put it behind your Encyclopedia Britannica, right? We're recycling our old jokes. And you let it collect dust together with all the other old books that you don't use anymore. Okay? So, like Rashi says, Lo yikra adam lavnai shem adam rasha. If everything that happens in this world comes about as a result of a person's name, don't use the name of a rasha. It can cause a person's downfall.
The question is on Ishmael, Rabbi Ishmael.
Okay, Meretz Hashem, we'll discuss that. Okay. In fact, Rabbi Isai, last week's Parsha Shlach, the Medrash Tanchuma tells us that every name of the Meraglim portended, it had a certain ominous effect and represented a certain rishus that each one of the Meraglim had. Medrash Tanchuma says, "Zechar yemais olam binu shnois darvadar la'olam yivdoik adam b'shemois." Person should always check into names. Likroi levnai haroi lioi sadik. Give your kid a fighting chance, right? If you're going to give a kid a chance, you can name your kid, delinquent. You're not giving him really an opportunity to be successful in the yeshiva. If you're going to give him shpilkus in the Heisen, if that's what you're going to call him, he's not going to really have a chance. You give him a good name him Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Moshe, and so forth. Give him a name that is right to be a tzaddik. Why? Ki lefamim Hashem goyrem toiva goyrem ra. Because sometimes a name will cause good or will cause bad. And the Medrash goes on to explain the names of all the Meraglim. Shamua ben Zakur. What does that name mean? Al shaloi shama b'divrei hamakom. He didn't listen to Hashem. Ukeilu shal bezchurai. It's as if he made a request through kishuf, through his male organ.
Wait a minute. They each achieved Nasius.
Okay, so I believe that the whole concept that a name has an effect on a person, it could be taken for the good also. Look at this name, Shamua. Because he didn't listen to Hashem. This man, Shamua, he could have listened to Hashem, and the name would have had a positive effect on him. But, because he was inclined not to, the name schlepped him in that direction. In other words, a name is a very powerful thing. So you see this name, Shamua. It doesn't say Loi Shamua, it says Shamua. So the name had an effect on him, but ultimately he had to choose to do bad. I don't believe that a child who has a certain name, his bechira has been removed from him. What it means is, the name has an effect. The name has an effect. V'chein hu omer. Okay. Kachatas kasmeri. How about Shafat ben Chayri? Shaloi Shafat es Yitzray. He didn't put his Yetzer in place. He became Chayri min haaretz. You could say the other way, right? You could say because if he would have chosen to be Shafat es Yitzray, he would have been Chayrin from Mitzrayim or some, right? Yigal ben Yosef. He was Moitzi Diba, right? Yoitzi, he was Moitzi Diba, and he was gathered before his time. Palti ben Rafoi. Palaratzim mimasim toivim. He escaped good actions. Gadiel ben Soidi. Diber dvarim kashim kagidim. Now listen to this. Says the Medrash, we know the Meraglim said Eretz oicheles yoshveha. Which one? Who said it? Says the Medrash, Gadi ben Susi said it. He tiach dvarim kape mala vehela sisya. He exclaimed the words toward God, and he gave rise to foolishness. That's what, he's the one who said Eretz oicheles yoshveha, and so on and so forth. The Meraglim, each one of their names was ominous to their downfall. Okay, so we're learning a very interesting concept. The concept is Shema Garim, that L'chu Chazu Mifalos Hashem, that everything in this world comes about through names, and that's why the Gemara Numa says, Loi Maskinon B'Shmael, don't give your kid a name of a Rasha.
We're Shlomiel.
Shlomiel, I'll tell you something very interesting about the name Shlomiel. If you look in Shlomiel ben Surishada, he's one of the Nesiim. So I once heard, what's a Shlomiel? Shlomiel is the guy, when the waiter is going around, he's the guy who always gets the soup spilled on him. The hot soup is on his lap. Of all the 9 people on the table, he's the one who the waiter is spilling the grape juice on. He's the guy, when you're passing the cholent, it ends up on his new tie. The Shlomiel. Listen to this. Of all the Nesiim, there's only one Nasi who you'll never read his Nasios on Shabbos Chanukah. He's the one Nasi. The first Nasi, it could be Shabbos Chanukah, the second one, the third one. Shlomiel, he's the one guy, he never is Zeicha to Shabbos Chanukah. And from there, Reb David Cohen has a sefer on the etymology of Yiddish words, so he says the word Shlomiel actually has a makar in the Torah.
What do you read on Shabbos?
No Muslim.
Well, he doesn't have good mazel. You know, he never has a Shabbos Chanukah. In other words, all the Nesiim, you could end up reading their day on Shabbos Chanukah. He's the one Nasi that you'll never read it on Shabbos Chanukah.
What number is he?
You'll take a look. But that's the etymology of Shlomiah. Anyway, I'll tell you one more. You know, how do you say grandson in Yiddish? Einikol. Listen to this, beautiful. Moshe Rabbeinu comes to the burning bush, and he says, "V'hine hasneh boyer ba'esh, v'hasneh einenu ukol," is not destroyed. Einikol. Einenu ukol, einikol. A Yid has a grandson, so that means there's continuity. It's, you know, la yamosh atar adam yipichom bizar einikol, he's einenu ukol. That's the etymology of the word einikol. Rav David Cohen in his Sefer on Yiddish. Yeah. Okay, Rabbi, so but today is not a Yiddish etymology learning. But in any event, so the Gemara is saying that a person's name has a very strong impact on their future. And therefore, we take a look at the name Korach, and we discussed this briefly last night. The word Korach, the name Korach, we say, you know, who's Korach? Of course, the antagonist of Moshe Rabbeinu. But in fact, he was not the first Korach in history. Who was the first Korach in history? Esav had a little boy, and this kid's name was Korach. Wow. Esav's son's name was Korach. Looking by Yishlach. Ve'ela hayu b'nei ahalivama, bas Ana, bas Tzivoin, Eshes Esav, ba'teled le'esav es Yeush, v'es Yalam, v'es Korach. So the very first Korach in history was probably a Rasha Marusha. In fact, Rashi in Chumash says that all of Esav's descendants, Kulam Mamzerim, right? Because they lived with their mother, their sister, their daughter, and you know, you could just imagine, right? Says the Chassam Sofer, if the very first Korach in history was the son of Esav, how in the world could the Bnei Levi, who are Tzadikei Olam, name their descendant Korach? Korach is the name of a Rasha. He's the son of Esav. The Gemara in Yuma says you can't use the name of a Rasha. Says the Chassam Sofer, Ani Tama al Tzadikim Bnei Levi. I wonder about these righteous descendants of Levi, Shekaru Shem Benam Korach, who named their son Korach, who Shem Me'alufei Esav. Korach is one of the chieftains of Esav. V'kaimalan Rishayim Loi Maskinan B'Shmayu. We hold that you're not allowed to use the name of a Rasha. Says the Chassam Sofer, and look what happened to the poor guy. B'chazi Mayol Sabeh. Look what happened to Korach. In other words, he asked the Chassam Sofer, what caused Korach's downfall? Was it his jealousy? Was it the fact that Gemara Psachim on Kuf Yotes says he was too wealthy for his own good? Was it that he was angry at Moshe? Was he jealous that he won't covet? Says Chassam Sofer, it was his name. It was all his name. His parents named him Stalin. They named him Korach. What worse name could you give than the son of Esav? So if you want to know what caused his downfall, it was his name.
But why is Stalin so surprised? No, there was actually young at that time.
Oh, so good. We'll see. So you mean maybe the Bnei Levi didn't know that?
He didn't learn that. How do you know?
Oh, we'll see. Simply put, the Gemara in Yuma, V'ulai says Chassam Sofer, listen to this. That's why the pasuk has to tell me his lineage, that he was ben Yitzhar, ben Kahas, ben Levi. So you would think if his father's a tzaddik, and his grandfather's a tzaddik, and his great-grandfather's a tzaddik, we have a principle that if you have 3 generations, v'hachur ha'meshulash lo b'mheira yinatek, then shuv Torah eina, right? The Torah will never be removed from your family. So how is it shaykh a guy like Korach, with a father Yitzhar, a grandfather Kahas, right? A great-grandfather Levi. How did he become such a bum? Vayikach Korach. You know what took away all of his ruchnias? Vayikach. Right? All of the first want to know. What is Vayikach? What took? Korach. The name Korach took away all of his spiritual lineage. You would expect, you know, his father's a Gadol Hadar, his grandfather's the other Gadol Hadar, his great-grandfather was Levi. So you would expect he would be, who knows what, he would be the next, you know, Mayatzis Gedolei HaTorah, right? He'd be the Rosh of. Says Chassam Sofer, Vayikach Korach. The name Korach took away everything that he was destined to get. To the point where the Chassam Sofer, this is a very challenging statement. The statement of the Chassam Sofer is Ani Tama al Tzadikim B'nei Levi. Who could say such a thing even? to be matmiya and the children of Levi? I mean, they're talking about the all-time Gedolei Yisrael. We're not talking about Tanoim here. We're talking about before the Nevi'im. We're talking about the Dar Deah. He's matmiya on the Bnei Levi. How could they give their kid the name Korach? So last night we tried to defend the Bnei Levi. We mentioned that Korach was also the name of Rabbi Akiva. You look in the Gemara in Bechayros, Daf Nun Ches. Rabbi Akiva was called Korach in Shas. Kireach. We find that Yaakov Avinu was, the name Korach was appropriate for Yaakov Avinu, because Korach can mean bald, can mean the smooth one. It was Alei Kireach. Yeah, well there it was disparaging, so you take a look in Taisus and Bechayros. But today, what we want to focus on is this concept that a person's name could have a very strong influence on their life. Okay, and that's what the Chassam Sofer is saying. In his opinion, what caused Korach's downfall was specifically his name.
But until that incident, if the tzaddik was a great man, he would.
But ultimately, again, a person's free will is not removed. He has to. The person himself has free choice. But a name has an impact on a person.
You're saying the name influences the Bechira is more powerful than that's what you're saying.
Look, there is a concept that certain people could be in situations where their free will is mitigated, right? Not everyone has the same level, 50-50 free will, right? Sometimes people could be in a favorable situation where it's easier for them to choose good. Other people, nobody's free will is removed. But a name exerts an influence on a person.
So how? He held this one. The Gemara said he's still skin Moshe Emes, the Torah says he's a Russia. If it's the name that did it to him, then
again, we're not saying a person who has a bad name all of a sudden he's automatically a Russia. All we're saying is that it exerts an influence on a person. Take a look at the Gemara in Yuma Daf Pei Gimel Amud Beis. Okay, says the Gemara a story. Vesu Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi Havi Ka'azli Ba'orcha. Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, they're going on the road.
Left side.
Rav Meir have a dayek v'shma. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi loy have a dayek v'shma. Rav Meir was into names, right? He would, before he would give you Shalom Aleichem, he'd say, "What's your name?" And he would, digest the name. See, okay. But Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda, they did not believe in the name business. Lo have a dayek v'shma. Kimatu lahu duchta. When they came to a certain place, boi ushpiza, they were looking for lodging. Ya'ivuhu. So they gave them an inn. The guy said, they said to him, Amr lai mashimcha, what's your name? Amr lahu, Kedar. My name is Kedar. Yeah? Amar, Rameir said to himself, Shma mina adam rashahu. This guy is a wicked guy. Shenemar, Kedar tapuchais hema. Because it is a generation that is reversed. In other words, a backward generation. Referring to a time in history when people are mechutzafim and so forth. So his name was Kedar. That was reminiscent of the pasuk Kedar tapuchais hema. Rameir said, I ain't trusting him. I'm not giving him my credit card as a deposit. I'll give him, cash. I'm not giving him any. Not depositing my jewels in his, safe deposit box. Forget it. Anyway, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, Ashlimu Kisayu. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi entrusted their wallet to this guy. Rabbi Meir lo yashlim le'kisai. Rabbi Meir did not give him his wallet. Azal, he went. Oisvei bekivrei davua. And Rabbi Meir went ahead and put his wallet near the grave of the innkeeper's father. Probably the innkeeper's father, he's buried in the backyard of the inn. So Rabbi Meir went, he dug a hole, and before Shabbos he hid the wallet next to the grave of this guy's father. So the father, he's lying there, he's been sleeping for a while. All of a sudden he feels, a shovel, sticking in the wallet next to his nose. What's this? I'm trying to rest in peace over here. And then it says the Gemara, Ischazi le b'chama. He goes and he appears in a dream to his son. He says, come, Sashakel kisei demanach hareshahu gavra. Come, pick up the wallet that's next to my head. The father in the Gold of MMH, right? He's looking after his kid. He says, come, you wouldn't believe it. Right next to my nose is a wallet. Why don't you come get it? Lamachar amar lahu, hachi ischazik li b'chamai. The next day, he wakes up in the morning. He said, I have these big rabbis in my inn. Let me ask them what they think about this dream. So he goes to Rabbi Meir. He says, you won't believe it, Rabbi Meir. Last night my father came to me in a dream and he told me there's a wallet near my head. So Rabbi Meir was a smart guy. He said, don't pay attention to dreams. He said, Amr lei, chelma debei shimshi les behu memasha. A dream you have during twilight has no meaning. Meanwhile, Rabbi Meir hears that the guy is getting, information from the next world that his wallet is next to his father. So Rabbi Meir quickly runs over to the grave, and he waits at the grave the entire Shabbos. So this way, he'd be able to get it after Shabbos. Azal Rabbi Meir v'notre kula yoma v'aisim. Rabbi Meir went ahead and he guarded it the whole day, and then he brought it. Lamachar, the next day, so Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi, they deposited their wallet with this guy. So they say after their stay in the inn, they say, okay, here's our key, we want our wallet back. Amar lahu lamachar amrullah, they said to him, Havlan kisan, give us our wallet. Amar lahu, lai hayu dvar ma'al. What are you talking about? You never give me your wallet. Amar lahu Rabbi Meir said to them, Amai loy daikisa b'shma. Why didn't you look into this guy's name? His name is Kedar. Don't you know he's a Rasha? Amrulay, Amai loy amr lamar. So they said to Meir, why didn't you warn us? You should have told us that this is a name has significance. Amar lahu, Eimer damri anach shashach zuki mi amri. I'm not saying it's a definite simon. I'm not saying just because the guy's name is Ma'ot Sitang that he's definitely going to be a mass murderer. But you have to be concerned. Mashchu v'ayil chanuz. You know what they did? They brought him into the tavern, and they gave him a drink. They got him drunk. Chazu talafchi as sifme, and they saw he had some lentils on his mustache. So then they went to his wife and they said, we gave your husband our wallet to watch, and the simon is that when we gave it to him, he had lentils on his mustache. So they gave the simon to his wife. The shaklu l'kisayu. So she brought out their wallet. Meanwhile, he wakes up from his drunken stupor, and he says to his wife, where's the wallet I gave you? She says, what do you mean I returned it? What do you mean you returned it? I was trying to steal it. Azaliyu, so what did he do? Kat leila itzay. He killed his wife. She has the chutzpah to give back the wallet that he stole. He killed his wallet. Says the Gemara, what do we learn from here? We learn from here the importance of mayim achronim. Why? Because if the guy would have washed mayim achronim, he would have wiped his mustache with his wet hands. He wouldn't have had the lentils on his mustache. He would have been able to steal the wallet, and he never would have killed his wife. So basically, the lesson from here is mayim achronim or bust. Right? Either wash your hands, otherwise you can end up killing your wife.
This is a much better lesson. When you give your wallet, get a receipt.
Yeah.
I mean, what's the opinion? This is...
And then the Gemara says, what else you learn from here? The Gemara tells a story about an innkeeper. He would feed the Jewish people kosher and the goyim treif. And how did he know who was Jewish or not? If you washed mayim rishonim, he knew you were Jewish. If you didn't wash mayim rishonim, he figured you were a guy. So a guy came in, he didn't wash mayim rishonim, he ended up eating chazer. So the Gemara says, what we need to glean from this Gemara is, if you don't wash mayim achronim, you're going to kill your wife. And if you don't wash mayim rishonim, you're going to eat a chazer.
Chazer or treif meat makes a difference.
Chazer. In any event, what do we see from here, Rabbi Sai? The concept is Shema Garim. A name has an impact on a person. Says the Chassam Sofer in the Tshuvas. Now take a look at this.
You mentioned in passing the name Malchus. Does this affect Goyish names also, or only by Jewish names?
Goyish names?
Oh, good.
No, not Goyish names. No, for a Goy to have a bad name, I don't think it affects. You could take a look in the Sefer Darach Sicha. Chaim Kanievsky writes that by Goyim, the name is not really a name. It's just like a title. It's just an identifying mark. It's like, size 15 and a half, 32 sleeve. Only by Yidden we have this concept that a name has an effect on their outcome, but perhaps also maybe it means something by God. Look in the Chassam Sofer. Chassam Sofer, Halach Lamaisa, in a Tshuva, in Siman Chaf Beis, he says like this, in the second paragraph. Says the Chassam Sofer, he's dealing with the name Zimmel. Zimmel. Hopefully no one here is named Zimmel. Yeah?
Good friend, his name was Zimmel.
So don't tell him over the shir. Says the Chassam Sofer, what is the name Zimmel? Everything we said till now, we need if we're going to agree with you, that Zimmel is a nickname for Zima. In other words, there's a guy, at his bris, his parents said, Zima, and as a nickname, the Bubba called him Zimmel. Says the Chassam Sofer, it's far-fetched in my eyes. Adam Yisrael Shem B'nai Zima. How could any Jew call their son Zima? Shehu atzas chita. The word zima means the council of sinners. Right? The word zima means a plan to commit arayas. Va'afilu kidar. Even the name kidar. She'ein b'mashma usay davara. Does the word kidar mean anything bad? Kidar just means ki-dar. That, the generation. That's the generation what? So you have to, but it's connected to bad words in a pasuk, Kidar Tapuchei Sema. So the Gemara Rabbi Meir would not trust the guy, even though his name wasn't Kidar Tapuchei Sema, his name was Kidar. Says Achsam Sofer, She'em b'mash musay davar ra, rak lashon hakra, Kidar Tapuchei Samach, Kidar Letapuchei. Even though you could have said it the other way around, because in Tehillim Kuf Yud Beis it says, Kidar Yesharim Yevayrach. There, Kidar is for a good thing. But if it's for good and it's for bad, and in the Chumash it's for bad, even though in Tehillim it's for good, you still have to stay away. Even though the word inherently doesn't mean something bad, it's just connected to something bad. So certainly the word Zima is something bad. Dayik Rabbi Meir Shmai. Rabbi Meir was Medayik in the name Kidar. Kemavor Parak Yom HaKippurim. V'noisnim Shem Zeh Lamamzer. Rabbi Sai. If a mamzer is born, what do you call a mamzer? There's a halacha in Shulchan Aruch, in Hilchos Milah. The halacha in Shulchan Aruch, in Hilchos Milah, is that a mamzer, you're supposed to call him Kidar. The halacha. What do you mean? What's wrong with Kidar? Maybe it's Kidar Yesharim Yevayrach? No. But it's also Kidar Tapuchei Sema. So says the Chassam Sofer, if Kidar, which is only remotely associated with something bad, is given as a name for a mamzer in Shulchan Aruch, mikol shekain shem zima, certainly the name zima shahashem atzmai maguna. The name itself is bad, and the Chassam Sofer brings a raya from the Gemara in Avodah Zarah Yudzayin and Beis that the Rabbanon say zima just means eitza, and the Targum adds the word chitin. But the conclusion of Rav in Masechta Avodah Zarah is that the word zima itself means arayas. Lo yale al das Yisrael likroi shmai b'shem zeh. How could it come up in the mind of any Jew to name their kid Zima? Okay, you ready for the punchline? Listen to this. If you look in Divrei Hayamim, Aleph, Parag Vav, Pasuk Hey, there was a man by the name of Gershom. Who was Gershom? The son of Moshe. And he had a son, LeGershom, Livni Benai, Beches Benai, Zima Benai. Gershom named his son Zima in Divrei Hayamim. Ubeis Levi Shekar Benai Zima. You have to say, says the Chassam Sofer, Ulai lo yadu adayin ma she'amar davar hamelech al Hashem Ruach HaKodesh. Maybe the Beis Levi did not know what David would reveal to us, Ruach HaKodesh, that the Gemara in Brachos teaches us, Asher Sam Shamais Ba'aretz, that everything in this world occurs through a name. In other words, we are privy to that information, but the Bnei Levi were not privy to that information, which is a very challenging concept, because everything in the Gemara is Misinai. So you would expect that Moshe Rabbeinu would have told his kids that if you're giving your son a name, don't name it Zima. Says Chassam Sofer, maybe, right? He's not saying it for sure. Maybe they didn't know this yet. And says Chassam Sofer, how do we know that they didn't know about this? Because they named their son Korach. And Korach was one of the names of the Alufei Edom. And they weren't careful with giving their kids the names of Hashem. Says Chassam Sofer, but look what happened when they did it. Again, now this is not Chassam Sofer ala Torah. This is halacha l'maisa. Chassam Sofer feels that if you want to pin down what happened to Korach, it's because of his name.
Who was born first?
The son of Esav? Or
Korach?
Of course, son of Esav. Esav was son of Esav.
Is a pasuk.
Now listen to this. This is going to be shocking. The name Shaul. Is Shaul a good name? Says Chassam Sofer, not so fast. Listen to this. This is amazing. Listen to this. Oy nimtza b'divrei hayamim b'vnei Levi shem Shaul. Lo yadatim huzen nikra kaidem Shaul b'chir Hashem. I don't know if this name was given before Shaul, the chosen one of God, or Yacharav. But one second, there was a Shaul who was a Rasha. You look in Bereshis, Shaul Merchayves Hanar was one of the kings of Edom. So the very first Shaul in history was a Rasha.
Shaul is Gehinnom also.
Yeh sheyeh lo nizaru likroi b'shem Shaul Merchayves Hanar mimachal Edom asher mochu lifnei melech melech bnei Yisrael. And what about Shaul ben Aknanis? Look in the Gemara in Sanhedrin. And that is why in the Tiv Gittin it writes that many people will not call their son Shaul. They write it Shin Vav Aleph Lamed to deviate from the name Shaul, because the first name Shaul was a Rasha. Shagim Lekroy says Shoel. Again, the first Shaul was Shaul Merchav Seir. Right, but he was not the first Shaul. Ve'ein Safek Shumitamanal. I, says Achsam Sofer, I'll prove to you that the name Shaul might not be as good as you think. Why? Listen to this. Because Chana davened for a son. And Chana was given a son. And she said, Ki me Hashem she'iltiv. I asked him from God. And what name did she give him? Shmuel. What does Shmuel have to do with Ki me Hashem she'iltiv? She should have called him Shaul. Ki me Hashem she'iltiv. You want to say borrow? It's Shaul. Why would she stick in the mem? Because you're not allowed to give the name Shaul. The name Shaul is off limits. She stuck in the mem because you can't name your kid Shaul. Wow. Says Achsam Sofer. You want to know? Chana said, "V'chana kar b'na Shmuel ki me Hashem she'iltiv. V'loi kar Shaul milashon she'iltiv. Behivsik ateva b'mem ein safek etzli." I have no doubt. Ki hoisan is heres b'zeh mitamanal. She was careful not to give the name Shaul. What about Kish, Shaul's father? Shaul, Bechir Hashem, the king of Israel, who never sinned. Right? Only one time. Bekish, Abishal loy nizar. And look what happened to him. He wasn't successful. Ultimately, Shaul was not successful. I mean, we can't even say such a thing. To talk about, the Malchei Yisrael, that it's says Achsam Sofer. You look at Shaul's career, and ultimately the Melucha was taken away from him. His name was not correct. And that is why Chana, the mother of Shmuel, specifically named Shmuel and not Shaul. You could say...
How does she know that?
Sam Sofer?
I mean, what?
It's amazing. I mean, we're talking about Sam Sofer. Sam Sofer used to say like this. They used to ask him, how is it possible to write such a quick response? Says Achsam Sofer, I have siyata d'shmaya that whatever I write, that's Taras Emes, whether... doesn't matter how quickly I write it. And he even said, if you come and you slug up all my proofs, the halacha still stands true. But it's not based on anything. Siyata d'shmaya, he felt he was a paisek hadar, that even if you would slug up all of his rayas, his psak still stood. He even said he was never chayzer on any of his psakim, except for one time, Refaim Zam Agolis caused him to retract, and then the Chasam Sofer later had charata that he retracted.
How can you say that about himself? So the others should say that about him.
Shaul did a lot of things that weren't so hatzitazi. He killed Yerakan. He killed himself. He committed suicide.
Okay, we don't find he was punished for that.
I'm not saying he did all these things.
But says Achsam Sofer very scary words. Chazu, right? Chazu ma'osale. Look what happened to him. Look what happened to him. How we can't even dare say such a thing, but that's what he says. So you could say, how nowadays could we name Shaul? The answer is we're naming after Shaul HaMelech. Shaul HaMelech, no question, he was a tzaddik. But the question was, the Shaul HaMelech, how could they name him after someone who was Shaul ben Akna, or Shaul Merchav Seir? We're not right if anyone's name is Shaul. It's a beautiful name. Shaul HaMelech was a big tzaddik, right? Halavai, anyone should be like Shaul HaMelech. Certainly one of the greatest individuals who ever lived. So nowadays, Shaul is a proper name. But the question is, Shaul's mother. Shaul's mother, says Achsam Sofer, perhaps was mistaken.
So how named Shmuel? Why did you bring the mem?
Because she wanted to name him Shaul.
Why the different noise? Why mem?
Maybe because Mei Hashem She'iltiv. I don't know. I'm not sure. Okay. So Rabbi say we want to now spend some time discussing some other names of Tanoim that we find in Shas that perhaps may be questionable. I have over here a Sefer Derech Sicha from Reb Chaim Kanievsky. So they asked Reb Chaim, there's a Gemara Megillah on Daf Chav Ches. It says the Talmidim of Zera asked him, "Why do you live so long?" So Reb Zera says, first of all, I never got angry in my house. Right, so we'll try to work on that one first, right? The second one is, he says, I didn't walk ahead of people who are greater than me. And I didn't think about Torah in the dirty alleyways. And I never went 4 amos without Torah and Tefillah. So they asked Reb Chaim Kanievsky, which one is harder? Is it harder not to learn in the dirty alleyways, or not to go 4 amos without Torah and Tefillah? So Kanievsky said, of course, it's much harder not to force yourself not to think in learning in the dirty alleyways and to make sure you learn every single moment. So they asked Reb Chaim, do you ever wake up in the middle of the night? He said, yeah, sure. So you wake up in the middle of the night. What are you going to do? You're lying in your bed. You can't say Birchas HaTorah yet, it's a Shaila. But if you're not saying Birchas HaTorah, according to the Vilna Gaon, you're not even allowed to think in learning. So okay, whether you're Zahir in this Gra or not, we may not halacha, but Reb Chaim is careful not to even be mahar b'Torah before Birchas HaTorah. So they asked him, what do you think about?
What do you dream?
Right? So he said, this is an old Shaila. So he said, what's the answer? He says, he thinks about the names of the Tanoim. He thinks about the names of the Tanoim in Shas. I'll tell you a story about that at the end. Okay? So let's talk about some of the names of the Tanoim in Shas. We know that one of the Tanoim, his name was Yishmael. Yishmael wasn't the greatest guy. The Gemara in Sanhedrin brings down an opinion that Abraham Avinu was not able to schlep Yishmael out of Gehenna. And there is an opinion Yishmael didn't do tshuva. So if you want to say he did tshuva, fine, so he was a tzaddik, So Rabbi Yishmael was named after him. But what if he... What? That's what we're asking, yeah. The Tana, Rabbi Yishmael, right? How is he named Yishmael? So says Taisvus Yishanim in Sechta Yuma. Who gave Yishmael his name? God. God said, you'll call him Yishmael. So if the Rebbeinu Shem gives the name to someone, even if the person wasn't such a big tzaddik, you could use the name. Because this is not the name given by Basar V'Dam. This is the name given by the Rebbeinu Shem himself.
But the question is, if you have an Aleph and Lamed at the end of your name, you can't go wrong.
Why? Not necessarily.
It's God's name. How can you go wrong?
But again, what Tosfos feels that this idea that a person's name has an impact on them is so powerful that even with God's name in it, even with God's name, if the person who had it was a Rasha, it still exerts an influence on a person. Another interesting shaila. There was a Tana by the name of Rabbi Eliezer. Yeah? Rabbi Eliezer is a very important Tana. You open up the Gemara Brachos, the very first Tana mentioned in Shas is Divrei Rabbi Eliezer, right? Ad Soif HaShmura HaRishayna, Divrei Rabbi Eliezer. The problem is, who was the first Eliezer in history? Eliezer, Eved Avram. Eliezer was an Urur, right? Eliezer said, how about my daughter for your son? Avram said, Ata Urur v'ani barach ve'ein Urur mizdavik v'barach. So he's an Urur. So how could the Tana of Eliezer be given the name Eliezer?
So
the Chida gives... What? He's a Kanani. Says the Chida in the Shem HaGdolim, the Chida gives 3 answers to this question. The first answer is... That's Elazar. The first answer is... What does the word Eliezer mean? What does the word Eliezer mean? The word Eliezer means Ki Elokei Avi Be'ezri. So says the Chida, Ki Elokei Avi Be'ezri, even if it's the name of a Rasha, but if it has a positive meaning, then you're allowed to use that name. So even though Eliezer Eved Avram was an Urur, nevertheless, since the name itself has a positive connotation, it's permitted to use that name. By the way, Rabbi Sai, this would be another answer to how the name Yishmael could be given, right? The Shas HaTshuvos B'Samim Rosh says that's how the name Yishmael could be given, because Yishmael, even though he was a Rasha, it's Shamakel, that God should listen to my tefillah. Another answer. Even though Eliezer was an Eved, but the Gemara says in Yuma, he was a Zakin v'Yosef v'Yeshiva. He was an old Rosh Yeshiva. And he was Damesek. Damesek stands for Doile Umashka Mitarasai Sharabi La'acherim. So he was a big Marbitz Torah. He was a big Maggid Shiur. He was a big Rosh Yeshiva. So therefore, even though he was an Ur, he was a tzaddik. So, right, that's good enough. Or, says the Chida, an amazing answer. We think now the Chida points out that the question is not on the Tana Rebbe Eliezer, because the Tana Rebbe Eliezer, you could say, was named after, like you said earlier, Eliezer, the son of Moshe Rabbeinu. The question is on Moshe Rabbeinu. How can Moshe Rabbeinu give the name to his son? So listen to this. There's a medrash. The medrash tells us in the Yalkut Shemaini that when Moshe Rabbeinu went up to Shemayim to get the Torah, so he saw HaKadosh Baruch Hu was learning Eliezer b'ni Omer Egla Bashanasa. So Moshe Rabbeinu said, who is this kid? Rabbeinu Shem said, he's a big Talmid Chacham. Moshe Rabbeinu davened, he should be my descendant. So that's what the pasuk means, says the medrash. B'shem ha'echad Eliezer is not referring to Moshe Rabbeinu's son Eliezer. It's referring to the Tana Rebbe Eliezer that came out of Moshe Rabbeinu. So it comes out. Listen to this. Moshe's son Eliezer was not named after Eliezer, the Eved of Avram. He's named after the Tana who came later. Right? What came first? Who came first? Moshe's son or the Tana? We say, of course, Moshe's son. No, Moshe's son was named after the Tana, the Medrash says.
But in the Parsha it says, Ki Hashem haya ve'ezri.
Yeah. That's the open reason. But the Medrash is being Megala that there's another Moshe Rabbeinu named his son after the Tana Rebbe Eliezer. In fact, if you look in the Noid of Yehuda, Masechta Brachas, the Noid of Yehuda says, who's the first Tana mentioned in Shas? Rebbe Eliezer. Why? In order to be Mechabed Moshe Rabbeinu, the Noisei HaTorah, we gave him the schus that his descendant should be the first Tana mentioned in Shas. While we're on the topic of Rebbe Eliezer, I once saw an amazing pshat, another pshat, why Rebbe Eliezer is the first Tana in Shas. The Gemara says in Psachim, Amar Rebbe Eliezer, Me'olam, like Kidmani Adam LeBeis HaMedrash. I was always the first person into the Beis Medrash in the morning. So Mida Keneged Mida, he was the first person in the Beis Medrash. They gave him the schus. He's the first person mentioned in Shas. Okay. Anyway, let's do a couple more. Tosfos says in Masechta Shabbos on Daf Yud Beis and Mid Beis about somebody by the name of Shevna Ish Yerushalayim. So Tosfos says it. His name couldn't have been Shevna. Shevna was a Rasha in Tanakh. So you have to change the Gersa to Shichna. So think about it. Maybe his parents made a mistake. Maybe his parents gave him the name Shevna. No, Tosfos says it's impossible that any Amoira mentioned in Shas, their parents could have been mistakenly given them the name of a Rasha. And because of that, Tosfos changes the Gersa. There's another Tosfos in Shas, in Masechta Yuma, where it says that in Gemara and Ksubis, on Daf Kuf Daled, it's talking about various Gezeros. There was a man by the name of Hanan ben Avshalom. Tosfos says it can't be Avshalom. Avshalom was a Rasha. Ein lechelek la'olam haba. Tosfos changes the Gersa to Avishalom. Avishalom. Another interesting Gemara, a Yushalmi. The Yushalmi says, Amar Rav Yehuda bar Titus. Now Titus, he didn't do tshuva. God didn't give him the name. I remember Rav Miller used to say that you look in the Roman history books, they talk about the brutality of Titus, but then they said at the end of his life, he calmed down and he was able to control his anger. So Rav Miller said, no kidding. When you have a mosquito in your brain pecking at your head, it allows you to not to get to ignore everything else that's going on in his life. But that's what the Romans report. At the end of Titus's life, he wasn't so bothered by what was happening in his surroundings.
So the noise of the banging.
Yeah, when he has a bird knocking on his cup, fine. Anyway, so what's Pshat Amar Rabbi Yehuda bar Titus? So the Gilyoinei Hashas, Rabbi Yosef Engel, he writes that you have to say, how could somebody be called Titus? You look carefully, it's not tough. It's not Tes, Yud, Tes, Vav, Samach. It's without a Vav. Titus, not Titus. So he's saved by the missing Vav. But you see, Rabbi say throughout Shas, this is something that's reckoned with, something that's thought about, that a person's name has an effect on them and contributes to the personality and character of a person. And it says the Chassam Sofer, that is why
Why can't you say that the last letter is not a samach, it's a mem?
That's it. Looks like to me like a mem. It looks like a mem.
Titem, not titus.
That's in the big one, but in the small letter it's the samach.
I guess it's a samach. So in any event, that's the idea, that Shema Garim. L'chu chazu mifalos Hashem, asher sam shemois ba'aretz. I saw something very interesting, the other extreme, on a positive note. Positive note, in the Hakdama of the 8th volume of Igros Moshe, Moshe Feinstein used to say, he was born on Zayin Adar, right? The day that Moshe Rabbeinu was born. And his name, of course, was Moshe. That Rabbi Moshe said about himself, he felt that being given the name Moshe, on the birthday of Moshe Rabbeinu, he felt had an impact on his life. That he felt being born on that day with the name Moshe was mashpia on him to be the Manik Shal Yisrael. So I saw over here there's a very interesting story about an individual who, his wife Nebuch was very ill, and she needed 24-hour care in the hospital. But every day for 1 hour, the man would leave his wife, and he'd go to a shiur. Okay, got to learn every day. But people had tinus on him, because the guy was an Amoras Gomer. He didn't understand one word of the shiur. It's one thing, you understand, you're getting something from the shiur. He didn't understand, he didn't have any comprehension whatsoever was going on. And they told him, look, your wife is ill, she needs your help, maybe you should help your wife. So, they asked different Rabbanim to go over to him, and to tell him, you're probably better off spending your time helping your wife. So he said like this. He said, when I was in Russia, and I was in the Russian army, every morning they would wake us up and they would say the following: what's the name of the Tsar? What's the Tsar's wife? What's his son's name? What's his daughter's name? What's his grandson? And we would have to recite the ganze mishpacha of the Tsar, one after another, ben, I'll make a homi shaberach. And if somebody would not say the name accurately, he was a dead man. And from then on I made a neder, that if God ever gets me out of here, even though I'll never be able to learn anything because I was never trained to learn Gemara, but I'm going to make it my business that when the Rebbe gives shiur, I'm going to recite the names of the Tanoim and Amoram in the shiur the same way I used to recite the names of the Tsar and his whole family. So even though I don't understand what's going on in the shiur, but when the Rebbe says Abaye, Rava, Ravina, Ravashi, I say it over, I memorize it, and this is my chelek in learning, and this is the idea that we're learning Shema Garem, L'chu chazu mifalos Hashem, al tikri shamois ela shemois. And Sam Sofer says ultimately this is what caused Korach's downfall, because Korach was the name of one of the Alufei, Esav. Rabbi Say, have a wonderful day.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.